In March 2012, the quiet town was shaken by an incomprehensible mystery. The sudden disappearance of 42-year-old Carmen Rodríguez, her 41-year-old husband Miguel, and their two young daughters, 3-year-old Sofia and 2-year-old Isabella. The family simply vanished from their home without a trace. There were no signs of violence, forced entry, or any struggle, which made the case even more intriguing. Neighbors and friends were bewildered. Carmen, an entrepreneurial woman with a thriving craft business, and Miguel, a calm and dedicated sales consultant, had always maintained a solid routine. When the disappearance was discovered, no one could believe that something so terrible could have happened in such a peaceful town. The community, which until then believed in a tranquil haven, was gripped by fear and uncertainty. What could have happened to this seemingly perfect family? The story you're about to follow is full of mystery and twists, and will keep you hooked until the very end. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any details of this intriguing case. Stay until the end because the story is only just beginning. In August 2016, more than 4 years after the disappearance of the Rodríguez family, an unexpected discovery would change the course of the investigation, which until then seemed to have no leads. Maria Herrera, a hiker who was taking a morning walk in a remote forest area about 180 kilometers from the city where the family lived, found something that made her stop. Initially, she thought the bones she found were from animals, but upon closer inspection, she realized that the remains had human characteristics. Frightened, and with a feeling that something was wrong, Maria contacted the authorities. The discovery was made in a difficult-to-access area, hidden among dense vegetation, and soon a team of forensic investigators was mobilized to the site. What investigators found deep in the forest was not just a collection of scattered bones, but 2 shallow pits, each containing human remains wrapped in plastic bags. Next to the pits was a 1.5 kilos hammer, clearly showing signs of use as a weapon, and bloodstains that matched the human remains found there. This macabre scene left no doubt. It was not an accident, but a brutal and calculated murder. Forensic experts confirmed that the impact marks on the bones exactly matched the characteristics of the hammer found at the site. The discovery was a profound shock and renewed the investigation, which until then had focused on the theory that the family had fled abroad, as indicated by some clues, such as the abandoned car near the border. The theory of voluntary flight was immediately discarded. The revelation that the Rodríguez family had been murdered changed everything. Investigators began to reevaluate all previous evidence from a new perspective, now with a clear focus on finding who was capable of committing such a crime. The impact on the community was immense, and the renewed investigation brought a sense of relief mixed with dread, since for 4 years everyone had lived with the hope that the family was merely hiding or lost somewhere. But reality showed that evil was much closer than imagined. This tragic discovery raised new questions and revealed the complexity of the case, which was far from being solved. When investigators arrived at the site where Maria Herrera had found the human bones, the scene revealed unexpected brutality and coldness. The isolated and difficult-to-access forested area had become the setting for a crime that would completely change the course of the investigation. There were 2 shallow graves, each approximately 60 centimeters deep. The bodies were buried carelessly, yet still showed signs of calculated planning. The fact that they were wrapped in black plastic bags indicated that the perpetrator had tried to hide the evidence, but without bothering to perform a careful burial. The way the bodies were arranged suggested a quick, emotionless execution, but with a clear objective: to conceal the crime as quickly as possible. The forensic examination of the crime scene revealed disturbing details. Experts noted that the pits had been dug with specific tools, not simply through improvised effort. The soil around the pits showed no signs of mud or recently disturbed vegetation, indicating that the location was carefully chosen, perhaps because the perpetrator had prior knowledge of the area. The 1.5 kilo hammer found near the pits was key to understanding the nature of the crime. It was covered in bloodstains, and experts confirmed that the impact of the hammer on the bodies was consistent with the injuries found on the bones. This indicated that the hammer was used precisely and repeatedly, with the intention of causing fatal damage quickly. The discovery of the hammer and the analysis of the scene showed that the crime was meticulously planned, with no signs of impulsiveness or desperation. The choice of location, the attempt to conceal the bodies, and the use of a hammer as a weapon indicated that the murderer had intimate knowledge of the family or at least of their habits. The coldness of the crime and the precision with which it was executed pointed to someone who had planned the family's death in advance. This completely altered the initial theory of voluntary escape. If before the police believed that the family had fled abroad, it was now clear that the truth was much darker. The murder of Carmen, Miguel, and their 2 daughters was a premeditated execution, carried out by someone with much deeper and more personal motives. The crime scene, with its macabre and carefully planned details, changed the narrative of the case forever. In the first few days after the Rodríguez family disappeared, the police investigation followed a line of reasoning that seemed logical, but which, over time, would prove to be wrong. Initially, authorities believed the family had fled abroad, motivated by some personal or financial reason, a planned escape to get away from something. The main piece of evidence supporting this theory was the family's car, found abandoned near the border. The vehicle's location raised suspicions that the family had crossed into another country, possibly to start a new life away from the pressures of daily life. Furthermore, investigators discovered that in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, the family's computers contained searches for documents needed for international travel and even language courses. These findings seemed to reinforce the idea that the family was preparing for a discreet escape. The clues indicated that the decision to leave everything behind, including Carmen's thriving business, had been made deliberately, but without any sign of violence or conflict. However, the investigation took a new turn when substantial checks, totaling over $40,000, were discovered being paid from Carmen's account after her death. These checks, while appearing legitimate at first glance, soon revealed an alarming pattern. They had been issued after the family's disappearance. From that point on, the investigation began to suspect that something was deeply wrong, and the theory of a voluntary escape began to crumble. These checks indicated that someone was using Carmen's bank accounts after her death, suggesting a possible financial motive behind the crimes. This led investigators to rethink the case in a darker light, indicating that the Rodríguez family had not fled, but rather been the victim of a planned crime. The revelation that someone was profiting from Carmen's finances brought a new perspective to the case and forced the police to review all previous steps of the investigation. The investigation, which initially followed the line of a voluntary escape, took a new turn when the police began to investigate more thoroughly the possible connections of the Rodríguez family with close associates. One of the first names to emerge was that of Fernando Castillo, Carmen's business partner, with whom she worked in the crafts business. Castillo had been a close business partner of Carmen's, and his constant presence in her business activities made him a natural figure in the investigation. During the analysis of the family's communications and financial transactions, the police began to raise suspicions about him, especially when it became clear that he was among the last people to have contact with Carmen before her disappearance. The crucial turning point came when DNA analysis revealed the presence of Castillo's genetic material on the steering wheel of the car, abandoned by the family near the border. This evidence was a landmark in the investigation, as it indicated that Fernando Castillo had been at the location after the family's disappearance, strongly suggesting his presence at the crime scene. The discovery of the DNA in the vehicle, along with other clues that began to accumulate, caused the police to focus their attention on him more intently. Furthermore, Carmen's bank records revealed suspicious transactions involving checks that had been cashed by Castillo, with forged signatures, but still processed in the family's accounts. Forensic analysis identified that these signatures, although well made, presented subtle inconsistencies that only a specialist would be able to notice. These fraudulent transactions, combined with the DNA found in the car, provided the necessary evidence for Castillo to be formally identified as the prime suspect. In 2017, after more than a year of meticulous investigations and a constant search for the perpetrator, Fernando Castillo was finally arrested. Castillo's arrest brought relief to the family and the community, but also raised many questions about the motives that led him to commit such a brutal and calculated crime. The fact that he was able to deceive the authorities for so long, feigning concern for the family while manipulating Carmen's finances, shocked investigators even more, who were now certain they had found the man behind one of the most mysterious and tragic cases in the region. The trial of Fernando Castillo, the main perpetrator of the brutal murders of Carmen, Miguel, Sofia, and Isabella, began in 2022, more than 10 years after the killings, but the case was still fresh in the minds of family members and the community. The prosecution had gathered a solid body of evidence, including Castillo's DNA found in the family car, fraudulent financial transactions, and analysis of the forged signatures on checks he had cashed from Carmen's account after her death. During the trial, prosecutors presented a clear portrait of a calculating man who took advantage of his partner's trust to commit a terrible crime, driven by greed and selfishness. The members of the Rodríguez family, who had suffered years of anguish and uncertainty, were present in the courtroom, waiting for justice to be served. For Eduardo Rodríguez, Carmen's father, and his brothers, Carlos and Roberto, the trial represented a moment of struggle for justice, but also a confrontation with the suffering they had carried for more than a decade. The pain of losing a daughter, a sister, and 2 granddaughters in such a violent and unexpected way was not something that could be easily overcome, and the trial brought back many repressed emotions. After weeks of testimony and evidence presented, the jury deliberated on Castillo's guilt. The verdict was unanimous. Fernando Castillo was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence, handed down immediately afterward, was a relief to the victims' families. Castillo was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought a sense of closure to the family, who finally had the certainty that the man responsible for destroying their lives would not have the opportunity to cause them more pain. The decision also had a profound impact on the community, which, although relieved by the conviction, could not erase the shadow left by the tragedy. The memory of Carmen, Miguel, Sofia, and Isabella would live on forever, and although justice had been served, the void left by the loss of an entire family would never be completely filled. For the family members, the relief was mixed with the sorrow of knowing that, however much justice was done, what truly mattered was the love and longing that would never be fully satisfied. The community where the Rodríguez family lived was deeply impacted by the tragedy that unfolded over the years. Initially, when the family disappeared without a trace, everyone believed in the hypothesis of a voluntary escape. The abandoned car near the border, the travel research done on Carmen's computer, and the absence of any sign of violence or struggle suggested that they had simply decided to start a new life elsewhere, away from the difficulties and pressures of daily life. The idea of an escape was easier to swallow for everyone, and many residents even began to think that the Rodríguez family had made this conscious choice, seeking a better future. For years, the community was divided between those who believed the runaway theory and those who somehow suspected something more was going on. But the shock came with the discovery of the bodies and the revelation that the family had been brutally and deliberately murdered. The truth revealed that someone within Carmen's inner circle, her own business partner Fernando Castillo, was responsible for this tragedy. The manipulation of the police and the creation of a false narrative about the runaway led the investigation down the wrong path, allowing the killer to live peacefully among the people, feigning concern about the disappearance. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Those who knew the family, especially Carmen and Miguel's closest friends and colleagues, were devastated to learn that the family's death had been a premeditated crime. The trust everyone had in someone who seemed so reliable and so close to the family was irreparably broken. This case demonstrated how appearances can often be deceiving and how evil can lurk in the closest figures. The lessons from this case are numerous. Trust, when misdirected, can be fatal. Betrayal is most painful when it comes from those you trust most, and a well-planned crime can deceive even the most experienced investigators. The story of Carmen, Miguel, Sofia, and Isabella reminds us that we need to question more, analyze evidence more carefully, and never underestimate a criminal's capacity for manipulation. The community learned, in the most painful way possible, that appearances can be treacherous and that the truth may be much closer than we imagine, waiting to be discovered. The Rodríguez family case offers a fascinating yet disturbing portrait of how a crime can be meticulously planned and executed, highlighting the psychological and criminological complexity of the perpetrator. To understand the profile of Fernando Castillo, the main person responsible for the tragedy, it is necessary to analyze the type of person capable of orchestrating such a calculated murder. In many cases of premeditated crimes, the criminal is someone with a controlling, cold-view, and manipulative personality, capable of hiding their true intentions behind a facade of trust. Castillo, Carmen's business partner, seems to be exactly that type of person. He had direct access to the family's finances, knew their routines, and knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses of the system to his advantage. Castillo's skill in manipulating investigations is also remarkable. From the beginning, he fueled the theory of a voluntary escape, diverting authorities to the wrong line of investigation. He knew that the police, upon finding the abandoned car and the travel records, would be convinced that the family had decided to move abroad. By doing so, Castillo managed to remain free of suspicion while, at the same time, using his position to continue accessing Carmen's bank accounts and even forging signatures. This manipulation of clues is a common characteristic among highly calculating criminals. They know how to create a smokescreen, a scenario that diverts investigations and keeps authorities busy in the wrong directions. Furthermore, the fact that Castillo used a hammer to commit the murders indicates even greater coldness. The hammer, a simple weapon commonly found in any home, was not chosen by chance. It allowed the criminal to act without drawing attention and without leaving obvious traces, while simultaneously causing evident physical trauma to the victims. The choice of a common, yet lethal tool demonstrates the criminal's ability to think pragmatically and efficiently, eliminating any direct link to him. This case also teaches us about psychological manipulation. Castillo not only committed the murders, but made a point of feigning concern, even interacting with investigators, to ensure he was seen as a victim of the same tragedy. The study of crimes like this reveals how difficult it often is to identify the culprit when dealing with a calculating, joyous patient-y and meticulous killer. In the end, the Rodríguez family case alerts us to the fact that, when it comes to a well-planned crime, the criminal can deceive even the most experienced investigators. Clues can be manipulated so effectively that the truth only emerges after a thorough analysis of all the evidence, showing how the criminal mind can be both calculating and cunning.